I heard there might be a couple of Latinos in North Carolina nowadays, so we played La Chona coming out. There we go. Thank you so much for having me, North Carolina. I said it earlier at the ACC meeting. They mentioned that you should never mention college mascots, so I'll say, are there any Sun Devils in the house besides me? No, okay, that's all right. That's all right. That's as far as I'm going to go. Elaine warned me, stay away from that stuff. You know, Arizona and North Carolina are very, very similar. We all have rich histories. We love the different spaces that we live in. We have an amazing diversity of people. But we also have amazing public servants. And I wanted to thank our recently out-the-door governor and our attorney general, your secretary of state, your auditor, all of your legislators. You guys are fighting a hell of a fight here in North Carolina. All I can say is keep it up. Keep it up. And here's why we've got to keep it up. We've got to keep it up here in North Carolina because you are the battleground state that is going to help determine who ends up in the White House in 2024. Now, in the 2022 cycle, that midterm, a lot of attention came on to Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. But I'll tell you what, for the presidential cycle in 2024, you not only have to double and triple down, but you've got to make sure that you give the outgoing governor and perhaps your incoming governor the legislature that they need to make sure to protect North Carolinians and their rights. Now I'm going to talk to you just a little bit about Arizona. In 2022, our voters spoke very, very loudly and very, very clearly against the fascists that were running against us, against democracy, and against our constitutional order. Now, I will say one thing right off the bat, and I said it a little bit earlier in that meeting. You heard me use the word fascist. I will not shy away from using that word. And if some snowflake gets upset because I use the word fascist, then they should stop acting like fascists. Now, before I get too far into this, I want to make sure that folks understand that investing in battleground states isn't just something that you need to do here. It's something that you need to reach out to your friends and neighbors across the entire country and say that North Carolina is the place that's going to determine whether or not Joe Biden stays in the White House, whether or not Kamala Harris is still our vice president, and whether or not we can get them a majority in the House of Representatives so that Congress can be functional again. There's a lot of work to be done, and I know a lot of you have national networks. Reach out, start now, and do what your governor said. Start organizing now, start registering now, start working now, because 2024 is barely just around the corner, and you need to lay that groundwork today, and every single one of you knows it. One of the ways that we can do that is by talking plain talk to our friends on the other side of the aisle, those friends who have a vested interest in the regular course of business. And the regular course of business is pretty important to a lot of Republicans. Predictability helps them figure out where to invest. Basic rational thought helps them organize for the future to figure out what they're going to do, how they're going to plan. Extremism is bad for business. We need to pay attention to who is paying attention. We need to pay attention to those folks who are vested in the rational, normal operation of our government. And to exclude a business community because they may not normally look at us as the folks who are on their side is a mistake. That's one of the ways that we won. I told chambers of commerce across Arizona, yes, I'm a Democrat. I've got my warm and fuzzy projects that I want to work on over here. But if you don't have a healthy business environment because of the unpredictability, because of the wackiness, because people are going to leave your state, because you're electing extremists, who are violating civil rights, who are violating women's rights, who are not supporting education, you're not going to get the investment. We won't have the tax base so I can do my warm and fuzzy stuff. Can we all win and reject extremism? We can do this together. And I'll get back to the messaging in a minute, but I want to tell you just a little bit about myself. I certainly do appreciate the introduction that I received here. And I could tell you a lot about the challenges, that we face. And that helps people understand who you are. I could talk to you about the challenges I faced going through boot camp in the Marine Corps, going through law school, being a prosecutor, standing for the rights of the accused. But no challenge has ever been as tough or as heart-wrenching as being the father of 3 teenage girls. That's tough. That's really tough. So yeah, thank you. I'll take that applause for sure. But one of the best ways to get to know someone is learning a little bit about the experiences they may have had when they were young. So I'm going to take a minute here and tell you a little bit of a story. I told this story at my inauguration on January 2nd. You know, I grew up on a small 8-acre ranch several miles north of the Mexican border down in a town called Nogales, Arizona. For me, it's the center of the universe. Apologies, Raleigh. And on that little ranch, we had, you know, just the typical little ranch stuff. Had a duck pond. We had 40 or 50 chickens, laid too many eggs. We couldn't eat them all, so my mom took them to school and sold them to the other teachers. And one day, my dad, who was a civil engineer, and his brother, also a civil engineer, were way over on the other side of the highway, several miles away, doing some surveying. And they came across a herd of wild horses, what they thought were wild horses. The next day, they called down to Wingfield, one of the ranchers nearby, and he sent a couple of his guys out, and they found out that it was one of those small herds of horses that had been stolen from ranchers in Mexico, packed up with drugs, brought across the border. The drugs would get on trucks, and the horses would end up abandoned out in the desert. Now, they didn't have any water, they didn't have any food, so several other cowboys went out. Just another day or so later, they found them and they brought them back, and our ranch was the closest one. They brought them under the box culvert under the highway, and there they were quarantined by the county sheriff, kept on our ranch. We got a couple bucks a day to feed them. The veterinarian, Escalada, came over and made sure that they were all healthy. And then the county did what the county does, and they had an auction. They had a good old-fashioned out west cowboy wild horse auction on my ranch when I was a kid. I was probably 12 years old, 13. And it was great. The day showed up. The sheriff's deputies showed up early to make sure the signage was up on the side of the corral there. And all of a sudden, all these trucks showed up with their trailers and cowboys and some kids and a bunch of people. There must have been 100 people there. And there wasn't that many head, but it was one of those things that happened. But there was one guy that stood out. He had this crappy little Nissan pickup truck. I mean, this thing was small and rickety. And the trailer behind it with a Sonora, Mexico license plate on it was just as small and just as rickety. So he came in like everybody else, and we're all standing around. Come to find out, one of the horses that was being auctioned off was stolen from him and his ranch. He had the paperwork and his actual branding iron to prove it. And so the auction proceeded. And it began. And each of the horses got auctioned off, and they weren't costing a lot. You know, these are horses that were, by law, available for the public, starting at $200, maybe $150. They weren't costing that much. Well, finally, after auctioning off several of these horses, it came to that one horse that belonged to this rancher. And the auctioneer started this one at $100. There were no bids. And the auctioneer looked around and he said, okay, we're going to drop the price $25. Does anybody want this horse for $75? Perfectly healthy animal. Certainly worth $75, if not $100, if not $2. No bids. Well, he went down to $50. No bids. He went down to $25. Now, the auctioneer has the authority from the sheriff to do what he needs to do in an auction. There were no bids for this animal at $25. So the auctioneer went over and looked at the sheriff's deputy, and the sheriff's deputy, everybody looked at the sheriff's deputy there. And he shook his head, and he looked up at the auctioneer, and he just nodded. And everybody knew exactly what was going to happen. The auctioneer said, I'll take $1 for this horse. And that old man standing there with his paper and his branding iron in one hand raised his other hand. And the auctioneer said, $1. And everybody looked around. And he says, $1, give me $2. $1, give me $2, $1, give me $2, give me $2, give me $2. $1, give me $2, give me $2, give me $2. You guys have been to auctions. This is North Carolina. You all grew up in auctions. No bids. $1 going once. $1 going twice. Sold. And that man got his horse back. That's the world that I grew up in. That's the world that we want our families to grow up in. We want our families to grow up in a world where they will be happy and healthy and safe and nearby. And we know we can do that as a community, but we have to have honor, not lies. We have to have compassion, not cruelty. And when we fight this fight, we have to hit it as hard as we possibly can. Earlier today, I talked about why we do what we do and who we do it for. We do it for those who cannot do it for themselves. I'm about to talk a little bit about how we can do it better and how we can get out there and win. Chapter 3 of Ecclesiastes has one of the most amazing verses in it. It speaks to the idea that there is a season for everything. There is a season to live and a season to die. There is a season to plant and there is a season to pluck up. There is a season to campaign and a season to govern. I added that last part. You can't die if you haven't lived. You cannot pluck up if you have not planted. And you cannot govern if you haven't won the campaign. We need to win if we are going to govern. Now, it's a very different thing to live and to die. It's a very different thing to plant and to pick up. It's a very different thing to campaign and to govern. When we get into office, we can be compassionate, we can be thoughtful, we can be kind, we can be statesmanly. We can do all of those things. But we, North Carolina and Arizona, are battleground states, and we need to stop pretending that we need to be nice during our campaigns. We need to reach down and grab a hold and punch like the devil is in our face. Battleground state Democrats have to fight. We have to fight with vigor. We have to fight with energy. And we have to not apologize for shoving their hypocrisy right down their own throats. This is going to take discipline. This is going to take desire. This is going to take authenticity. And it's going to take honesty. It's going to take that brutal honesty that sometimes polite society doesn't want us to share. Trust me, as a lifelong resident of the westernmost southern state, I know what it means to be polite. Sometimes you say, bless your heart, but that's not what you mean, is it? Sometimes the only thing they're going to actually hear is when you say it. You are wrong, you are lying, and you need to do better by the people you purport to serve. That's what we need to be telling them. You know your audience. You know your state. You know your communities. I can't tell you how to campaign in North Carolina because I don't know what the truths are here in North Carolina, but I can tell you what works in Arizona, and I've got proof. I've got receipts. I came after Mark Fincham, my opponent, because he was an oath keeper, and I called him that. He was a fascist, and I called him that. He was an anti-Semite, and I called him that. And I called him out at every moment. And what was the electoral result? What was the electoral result? Senator Mark Kelly also won Arizona. Senator Mark Kelly spent $70 million in his campaign proper and netted about 2,600 more votes only statewide, more than I did. Senator Mark Kelly is a friend, and I love him to death, but I didn't like his campaign style because I didn't think he was tough enough. Think about it. With those many millions of votes, what only separated us wasn't that 2,600 votes, and it wasn't the money, because compared to his 70, I raised $4 million. What separated us was the fact that I was willing to call those fascists and liars. I was willing to get in their face and challenge them at every step of the way and tell them, how dare you take that one book off that shelf when you will not take that AR-15 off of that grocery store shelf? How dare you say you care about children? You cannot say to a parent who is scared to death every single day sending their kids to public school like I am, that you care about children when you're allowing an 18-year-old with dad's credit card to go to the Bass Pro Fishing shop and get a weapon of war that I used to teach Marines how to kill with. Those weapons don't belong on our streets. We need an automatic weapons ban, assault weapons ban. We need red flag laws. We need the kind of safety that are common sense. And I challenged a friend very recently on this. He's not an extremist. He's got his guns. He likes his guns. Hell, it's Arizona. We all have guns. And by we, I mean, like, you know, me too. And I don't mind putting holes in pieces of paper once in a while. But he said, well, the Second Amendment protects it all. And I said, really? How old do you have to be to buy alcohol? Why? Why? You got to be 21 in Arizona. Why? Why isn't it 20? Why isn't it 22? Why do we have an age at all? There's no constitutional right to drink. We make reasonable judgments on subject matter because that's how you govern, and we decided that was the safest age to impute and to prohibit the purchase of alcohol. Why aren't we doing the same with weapons of war? Why can't you yell fire in a crowded theater? We have a First Amendment. You see, when you talk to these folks in terms that they can understand, which means monosyllabic in many cases. And I'm being a little mean, it's okay, it's okay. When you talk to them in basic terms and you relate to them directly as neighbors and as friends, you're lending them a lot more courtesy than many of them deserve. Right? But you're actually having that conversation. So have those conversations. Do the thing that they wouldn't do. Engage them. You all know them. Hell, half of you are related to them. I know that. I've got a cousin in Las Vegas. He's insane. He's absolutely bonkers. I still love him. Because if I didn't, my mom would get really, really pissed. We can also, while talking about, you notice what just happened? While talking about the most serious of serious things, we can have humor and we can have humanity. We can still be humane. And I have to disagree with some of the folks in our party who say when they go low, we go high. Only disagree because I think that's incomplete. When they go low, we use the high ground to beat the hell out of them. That's what we do. That's what we need to do. And we need to not relent. So don't forget, North Carolina Democrats, you can have a hell of a lot of fun and make a big difference in the lives of folks who need you. The folks who don't have the voice, the folks who can't afford the ticket to be in here, the folks who may not have the resources or the means or the knowledge or the wherewithal to register to vote because they're working for 3 jobs and they're taking care of their families. We owe it to them to work that much harder. We owe it to them to invest that much more. And we owe it to our future. Now, I know there's some young Democrats in here. The 7,800th president of something is in here, the young Democrats. Where is that young gentleman? He was in here a minute ago. He's setting up the drinking later. Okay. Okay. One of the things that's really critical is that we reach out to young voters. They're going to make the biggest difference. And in Arizona, I think the trend is similar here in North Carolina. Year after year, the last couple of cycles, we've seen a little bit of an increase in the youth vote, and that's 35 and younger. And people ask me all the time, they're like, say, Secretary Fontes, how do we talk to young people? And I think for a minute, like, I'm 53, how do I know? My kids don't listen to me. But there's a reality there because I don't know how you talk to them. But I do know this. It would be a heck of an awkward thing to try to just tell them what's up, what's important, how they should comport themselves, why it's important. And here's why it's a hell of a thing. Because I don't have their frame of reference. I don't come from their world. I didn't grow up doing live shooter drills in school. I didn't grow up during a pandemic where I lost a couple of years of typical socialization because of quarantines. I didn't grow up thinking that by the time I was 40 or 50, American cities would be underwater. I didn't grow up with the weight that they have on their shoulders and the real fear they feel every single day. How dare I tell the young people, instead I should be listening to them and hearing them and respecting them. And now, the bottom line is this, folks. We're all here for the same purpose. We want a better America. We want a better North Carolina. We want a better Arizona. Heck, we'll be okay with a better Idaho, too, if that comes with the package. I'm okay with that. I'm going to close off with a quick little story here. And you guys have been so kind. And Secretary, I appreciate the introduction. And your guidance and your leadership at the National Association of Secretaries of State, to your next governor, best to you, and your lovely bride was so gracious when I embarrassed myself in front of her a little bit earlier. Long story, we'll worry about it some other time. But when I was on the campaign trail years ago, I ran into a guy named Marshall. Marshall's was at the time 92 years old. I hope he's still with us, veteran of World War II. And he said, back in his day, there were these 10 little two-letter words that they learned that I reminded him of. And he said the 10 little two-letter words were really critical because everybody on the ship knew what they were. All the rest of the folks around knew what they were. It was something, I guess, that Tom Brokaw's Greatest Generation all knew what these 10 little two-letter words were. And he said, this is what guides me. He said, this is what helps me move forward. And he said, you remind me of this. And I said, okay, that's cool. And as he was talking about this and telling me about where his ship was in the Pacific and all this other stuff, I just kept saying, like you're saying now, what are they? They're 10 little two-letter words. 2 letters each word. 10 of them. And they make the biggest difference in the whole wide world. But individually, I have to be the one that speaks this internally. I have to be the one that takes on this mantle. I have to be the one, because that's what the 10 little two-letter words means. And if every single one of us in this room actually engages ourselves and does what the 10 little two-letter words tell us to do, boy, North Carolina's going to look really, really good. The 10 little two-letter words. Sorry, I had to indulge myself for a minute because I was like, none of these people know me. There's like 500 of them in here, and they're all hanging on my every word. That doesn't happen very often, so I certainly appreciate it. But the 10 little two-letter words are this. If it is to be, it is up to me. Say it with me. If it is to be, it is up to me. One more time. If it is to be, it is up to me. Is North Carolina going to turn blue? If it is to be, it is up to me. Are we going to protect our children in their classrooms? If it is to be, it is up to me. Are we going to make sure women can choose what they do with their own bodies? If it is to be, it is up to me. I am so proud to have been here with you tonight. Thank you, thank you, thank you, North Carolina Democrats. Now go out and win in 2024. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.